The catastrophe killed nearly 19,000 people and crippled the Fukushima plant in northeastern Japan, spewing radiation and forcing tens of thousands to flee their homes. Well, RT's correspondent Sean Thomas has been there and he witnessed the aftermath of the disaster. Let's now talk to you, Sean, in more detail about what you saw there. Tell us what you saw there. What's your personal experience of what you saw? Well,
when I first arrived, what struck me the most is the fact that it was a disaster much larger than people really even remember. In fact, what you had was you had the earthquake, you had the tsunami, then you had the nuclear disaster, and then the lingering disaster after the fact. So traveling to the coast, homes destroyed, villages decimated, and the people doing what they could to try and pick up their lives. In fact, we went to this one village where they were still cleaning up and basically, the place was in shatters. But there was a troupe that had come in from Tokyo to entertain the children with a play, basically, to try and put a smile on the faces of these people who had been through such harsh times. And just trying to find a place to eat was incredibly difficult as well. So just being there amongst the people who were trying to pick their lives back up, knowing that I had the ability to get out of there and they did not.
Well, it's certainly shocking, and the footage that we saw back then is certainly very dramatic. And I remember you sent us a lot of reports from Japan. Let's now take a look at some of what we got there from you.
One of the frightening things about this entire incident is that there are no concrete boundaries that can clearly guarantee your safety. One example is this looks like a beautiful lush green valley behind me, but in fact this is the very edge of the 20-kilometer exclusion zone that the government has set up. In fact, we tried to get a little bit closer, but were escorted out by a police officer and a TEPCO official. Now, although this is supposed to be a safe area, the radiation levels here are still between 7 and 10 times higher than normal.
Right. Well, Sean, obviously you're a journalist doing your job there, but on a personal level, what sort of thoughts were passing through your mind while you were there?
Well, certainly in that particular spot, we were right there at the edge of the safe zone, as it were, but it wasn't very safe, as you heard in there in that report. But even much further from there, 80 kilometers from the actual reactor itself and 60 kilometers from the edge of that zone was Fukushima City, and we found a spot there in our own personal reporting that was 1,000 times the acceptable limit or a safe dosage, if you will. And this was on a spot where kids walk to school. And here I am, not in any particular safety gear, but I'm in an area where the government says it's safe to be. So certainly very eerie to be in a place that's supposed to be safe, but obviously with our radiation detectors, very dangerous place to be.
But were you scared at any point? I mean, how did you feel being in a place
certainly
like that?
It's one of those things where you don't think about it until after you get back, because when you're there you are focused, you do have a job to do, you have deadlines to make it, but when you get back you say, you know, radiation, the silent killer, we don't really know what effects that have personally hit me.
Sure, because it may have long-term effects. I mean, as you said, it's an invisible enemy. We don't know what's happening to us at that time, immediately, but the effects may come later. Well, today, as we know, protesters claim that not enough is being done to clean up the contaminated areas. So in yours, I mean, you visited some of the areas. You saw some of the things that were being done there right after the disaster hit. So what is your personal experience of that?
Well, the people we spoke to have a great distrust for the government. They don't, at that time, they don't feel that they were getting all of the information that they needed for their safety, and they didn't think that enough was being done at that point in time. So I can tell you there was a great distrust based on how the situation was handled from the get-go.
All right, well, 2 years on, how deeply is the tragedy felt today?
Pretty deeply. It's one of those things that I feel in my heart. It's one of those experiences that I will always remember.
All right, Sean Thomas, thanks very much for talking to us about your personal experience of the disaster that hit Japan 2 years ago. Now, thousands in Japan have been rallying to demand the government shuns nuclear power, but can the country actually afford such a radical measure? Well, we have in the studio Tom Barton, who's been looking into that for us. So, Tom, tell us about how this the use of nuclear power is seen by governments today, not just in Japan, but beyond that as well.
Yeah, well, of course, Marina, following this leak, radiation leak, it has led to a lot further ramifications for policy in Japan and beyond. So if we look at Japan, first of all, before this leak, nuclear energy made up about 25% of Japan's energy needs. Afterwards, all nuclear reactors were suspended. Some have since been restarted to try to cope with blackouts. Far away in Germany, the public and politicians were horrified by what they saw unravelling in Japan, and that led in part to the Bundestag's decision in May 2011 to end all nuclear power in Germany by 2022. It had made up about a quarter of nuclear energy supply there, and big questions in the future about what's going to be the future of that. In France, a very different policy. Since the 1970s, France has really pushed nuclear energy as a clean and safe provider of energy. It still makes up nearly 80% of France's energy needs. And there, although public opinion has changed slightly, it's still very much more in favour of nuclear power than it is in Japan.
Well, the economic factors seem to be a strong driving force behind the use of nuclear energy. So which is winning the argument here, to have more of it or less of it?
It is a really big question concerning governments and the public opinion throughout the world. If we look at Japan again, really struggling with this issue in Japan, the new government is more pro-nuclear energy than the previous government was, but they're going to have a big time trying to convince the Japanese population that it is worth it. One thing they have on their side is that nuclear power is demonstrably cheaper than other alternatives, than fossil fuels or renewables. There just isn't enough of those renewables yet to try and cover the gap. In Germany, which has really gone for this getting rid of nuclear, the problem there is a potential energy gap. Renewable isn't there to fill it yet, with the likelihood that there will have to be more fossil fuels to do that. All of these issues having to be grappled with by governments around the world.